Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to play detective, but in a lab coat. We're going to pull back the curtain on what happens when a really important medical test comes back, well, weird.
So let's just jump right in. Picture this. A lab gets a patient's sample. They run it through this super advanced modern test, and the result? It's murky. It's not positive, but it's not negative either. Now, you might think it's an error, right? Nope. This is actually the beginning of a real-deal diagnostic mystery.
So there's a name for this kind of thing. It's called a weak positive result. And let me be really clear here. This is not a diagnosis at all. It's more like the first clue that a detective finds. It's a little flag that pops up telling the lab pros, hey, you got to look closer at this one. Something's up.
And to figure out this mystery, you first have to understand the tool they're using. Because at the heart of all this is a really powerful but also really complex piece of tech, the modern fourth-generation HIV test.
Okay, so here's the deal with these tests. They're built around this fundamental trade-off. On one side, you have this incredible sensitivity. I mean, they can spot a potential infection super, super early, and that's absolutely critical for getting treatment started. But that same sensitivity is kind of like a smoke detector that's so good, it sometimes goes off when you're just toasting bread. It can get triggered by other things that aren't HIV at all, which leads to a false alarm. So how does the lab know it's one of these tricky results? It all comes down to a number. It's called the S/CO ratio, which stands for signal to cutoff. Just think of it like this. The lab machine is looking for a signal from the sample. There's a set line, a cutoff. If the signal is way above that line, boom, positive. Way below, negative. But what happens when the signal is just hanging out right on top of that line? That's your weak positive. And that's the trigger for the entire investigation.
Right. So when that fuzzy signal pops up, the lab doesn't just, throw their hands up and report an uncertain result. No way. They launch a full, formal investigation. It's like a switch flips. They go from just running tests to being full-on detectives, laser-focused on finding the real story behind that signal.
And every good detective knows where to start, right? The scene of the crime. For the lab, the crime scene is the blood sample itself. So they go right back to the source, the original evidence. They're looking at everything. What kind of tube was used to collect the blood? How was it handled? Every detail matters. And pretty quickly, they usually have a prime suspect in their sights. It's the stuff called separator gel. You find it in some of those blood collection tubes, and its job is to, well, separate the serum from the blood cells. Simple enough. But here's the thing. This gel has a bit of a reputation, a known rap sheet for messing with these ultra-sensitive tests.
And listen, this isn't some wild guess or hunch. It is a well-documented fact. Official lab standards, clinical studies, they've all shown that tiny bits of this gel can sneak into the serum and basically trick the test into giving a false positive. So in our detective story, the suspect has now been placed squarely at the scene.
Okay, so they have a suspect. Now what? Well, now it's time to interrogate the evidence. The lab has a specific protocol they follow to prove or disprove if the gel is the real culprit here. And it's a really systematic process. Step 1, they check, was a gel tube even used? If the answer is yes, they take that original sample and they spin it down again in a centrifuge. And I mean, really spin it at crazy high speeds, like over 3,000 Gs. The idea is to literally force any of those sneaky gel particles to the very bottom. Sometimes they'll also dilute the serum a bit just to water down anything that might be interfering. Then, once the suspect is hopefully out of the picture, they run the test again. But here's the thing. Even after all that, it's not always 100% certain. The lab knows there's an even better way to get a clear-cut answer. They need a witness, a reliable witness who is never contaminated by the suspect. And that star witness, it's a plasma sample. If the lab is lucky enough to have a plasma sample from the same patient collected at the same time, that's the key that unlocks the whole case. Why? It's simple. Plasma is collected in different tubes that don't have that separator gel. It is a clean sample. It's an untainted source of information, and it lets them make a final call with way more confidence.
And this whole approach, it lines up perfectly with what the big guys like the CDC and the World Health Organization recommend. Their logic is just, well, it's just logical. If you get a reaction on the first test, but you can't get that same reaction when you retest with a cleaner sample, then the final call is false positive. The reaction couldn't be repeated, so you can't trust it. It's not real.
So think about everything we just walked through: the spinning, the dilutions, the hunt for a better sample. All of that careful, painstaking work. It seems complicated, but the entire investigation really boils down to one single powerful rule.
So, after following all these clues, what's the bottom line? What's the big takeaway from our whole detective story here? When a lab is staring at one of these weak positive results from a serum sample, what is the absolute best thing they can do?
This is it. This is the golden rule. The whole investigation points to one single clear answer: retest with plasma. That's it. It is the most direct route to the truth. It just completely bypasses the prime suspect, that separator gel, and gets you a clean answer. And you know, that's really the whole point of this story. This entire meticulous process, it's a safety net. It's all about protecting patients. It ensures that a confusing clue, that little weak positive signal, gets investigated until there's absolutely no doubt. It's what stops an ambiguous result from turning into a wrong and potentially devastating diagnosis. So what are we left with? It's the fact that we almost never see this kind of detective work. It's all happening behind the scenes, in the lab, carried out by these incredibly dedicated professionals. But their hard work, their diligence, that's the very foundation of the trust we put in medicine every single day. So maybe the next time you get a lab result, just remember, if there was even a shadow of a doubt, a quiet investigation like this one made absolutely sure the answer you got was the right